My project is on the impact of interparental conflict and sensitive parenting on children's cognitive functioning. And first, I want to note that the data that I used in this study is from the first 2 waves of data collected from Project Flight. So first, I'm going to introduce some concepts that are important to understand my paper. First, we have interparental conflict, which is defined as disagreements, arguments, and disputes between parents in a family setting. And later on, I'll go into how we define this in my project. Next, the emotional security theory framework is family system processes such as interparental conflict and parenting impact children's emotional security, and children need emotional security for typical development. Next, sensitive parenting is defined as the capacity to organize interactions and responses in a way that support the children's developmental needs. And it's important to note that in my project, we examined maternal and paternal sensitive parenting within the same model. And also there is great research on maternal sensitive parenting, but a real lack of research on paternal sensitive parenting. So that's one reason why the findings are really interesting. Next, executive functioning, our higher order cognitive control of thought, action, and emotion. And there are many skills comprised in executive functioning, but this project focuses on warm and cool problem solving and working memory. Warm problem solving is emotionally or motivationally charged, and cool problem solving is pure cognitive EF. So in my study, warm problem solving is assessed through a test where you can win a prize, while cool problem solving is not. And working memory is defined as the ability to hold information after it is no longer perceptually present. So past research shows that interparental conflict has negative implications for children's executive functioning, specifically cognitive, social, academic, and psychological functioning. Research also shows that interparental conflict has negative impacts on sensitive parenting, both maternal and paternal. And finally, that sensitive parenting is really important for the development of children's executive functioning. So my first hypothesis was that interparental conflict will be associated with lower levels of cognitive functioning in children. And my next hypothesis, excuse me, was that I expected to see an indirect relationship of interparental conflict and children's cognitive functioning through sensitive parenting. So this meant that higher levels of sensitive parenting would be associated with higher levels of children's cognitive functioning. So the participants were from a larger study, Project Flight, but there were 235 families, and the families were mother, child, and the father. The child was about 3 years old at the first wave, and about 63% of the mothers identified as white or European American, and 67% of the parents were married at wave 1. The 3 of them came to the Mount Hope Family Center once a year for 2 years for a 3-hour visit, and they completed behavioral and cognitive assessments. In addition, the parents completed some self-report measures. So they completed a lot of tasks and measures, but the 5 that are on this slide are the most important for my study. So I'll go through each of them. First, the interparental problem-solving task was given at wave 1, and this was when the parents had to sit and talk about 2 topics that they disagree upon for 5 minutes each. And these videos were coded using the systems for coding interactions and dyads for negativity and conflict, and problem solving and communication. Problem solving and communication was reverse scored, and they were summed to create the interparental conflict measure for my study. Next, sensitive parenting was assessed at wave 1 through the discipline task, where the parents individually had to sit with their child for 5 minutes and talk about a topic of discipline, just how they would at home. And these videos were coded for caregiving, with the caregiving around the discipline system for sensitivity, both maternal and paternal separately. And next, the child outcomes. First was warm problem solving, and it was assessed using the puzzle box. Here it is at wave 1 and 2. And the child was told that if they could get that toy you see there out of the box, they could keep it. So that's why it was a warm test, because there was a motivation to get the toy out. And it was coded using the puzzle box coding system for problem solving in the child. And this was the warm problem solving, which you'll see later. And next, cool problem solving was assessed at wave 1 and 2 as well, using the block design subtest of LIPSI. And this was a cool problem solving task because there was a lack of reward. There was nothing they got out of it for completing the task. And finally, working memory was assessed at wave 1 and 2 as well, using the picture memory subtest of WIPSI. So here's a conceptual model, and you can see the filled in lines are the significant effects. So you can see the middle effect from interparental conflict to warm problem solving, which is the puzzle box task. And then you can see an indirect pathway through paternal sensitivity to cool problem solving, which was the block design, and interparental conflict through maternal sensitivity to working memory. So I'll go into the results further on this slide. So the direct effect we saw from interparental conflict to warm problem solving was a negative association. So higher levels of interparental conflict were associated with lower levels of warm problem solving. And next, the indirect effect through paternal sensitivity, there was a negative association from interparental conflict to paternal sensitivity. So that meant higher levels of interparental conflict were associated with lower levels of paternal sensitivity. But then we see a positive correlation from paternal sensitivity to cool problem solving, which means that higher levels of paternal sensitivity were associated with higher levels of cool problem solving. And finally, through maternal sensitivity, we see a negative interaction from interparental conflict to maternal sensitivity, which meant higher levels of interparental conflict were associated with lower levels of maternal sensitivity. And finally, again, the positive relationship from the maternal sensitivity to working memory, which meant that higher levels of maternal sensitivity were associated with higher levels of working memory. Another thing to note is that we controlled for wave 1 of the child outcomes. As you can see, they're each significantly and positively correlated with each other, which meant that these results held over 2 waves of data, which is a really important finding. So as you saw on that slide, higher levels of interparental conflict were associated with lower levels of children's cognitive functionings. And these results are consistent with the emotional security theory framework, because in high stress environments, children are unable to typically develop. So now I'm going to go through each of the effects we saw. So first, the interparental conflict to warm problem solving, which is a direct effect, can be explained by self-regulation, because interparental conflict causes poor self-regulation in children, which makes it hard to complete warm problem-solving tasks with the reward. Personally, I've coded a lot of puzzle box videos from both wave 1 and wave 2, and I've seen a lot of children become frustrated with the box and have a hard time self-regulating. And this can be possibly because of the interparental conflict they're experiencing at home. Next, we have the first link of the indirect effect, which was interparental conflict to sensitive parenting, which can be explained because of the spillover that the interparental conflict can affect sensitive parenting in that negative way. And next, the sensitive parenting link to children's cognitive functioning, specifically higher maternal sensitive parenting was associated with higher working memory in the children, and higher paternal sensitive parenting was associated with higher problem solving. And this perhaps can be explained by the stress response system, because if there's stress in the family system, it can cause the parenting to have that negative effect on the children. But it's important to note that if there are stressful home environments and the parents are able to use their sensitive parenting skills, this can possibly buffer the effects of the interparental conflict and allow the child to develop typically. So some limitations to note. First, the interparental conflict measure, as I explained before, was coded using negativity and conflict in problem solving and communication. And there could be better ways to address this measure, if it's better codes or if it's a combination of codes and self-report measures. Next, interparental conflict and sensitive parenting were both only observational reports. So maybe in the future, it'd be interesting to use observational reports and self-report measures as well. And finally, as I noted in the beginning, there are many components of EF. My study just looked at problem solving and working memory. So it'd be interesting to use other components and seeing if the effects still have the same results. Finally, some further directions, future directions. First, when wave 3 of data is completed at flight, it would be interesting to use more waves of data in this study and see if the results hold. So for interparental conflict and sensitive parenting, I used 1 wave, and child outcomes, I used 2. So adding more waves to each of those and see if the results still hold. Next would be to follow up the children when they're maybe school age and see if they've built pathways of resilience, whether that be through peer or teacher relationships, and seeing if that also can buffer the impact of interparental conflict. And finally, to teach parents that these are the effects that we're seeing of interparental conflict, and maybe educating them and teaching them how to resolve conflicts in a way that teaches their kid conflict resolution, and seeing if that also can help buffer the effects of interparental conflict. So here are my references. And before questions, I want to thank everyone who has helped me with my project. Hannah has been an amazing help. I've been coding with her since 2017, and Dr. Sturjackle and Dr. Davies for being my readers, and everyone at Project Light. So any questions?